Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm gonna show you how to make pants from an existing pair of pants that you have in your closet. You'll make the pattern and sew them up. So first start with a big sheet of paper. If you don't have pattern making paper, you can use like butcher paper, maybe go to your local butcher and ask, or you can tape a bunch of pieces of paper together. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that you know where the crotch seam or the rise seam and the inseam of your pants come together. You're going to want to make sure that you lay the pair of pants really flat and nice so that you can mark where to put that seam on your pattern. Line up your pants with, if you're using pattern paper, with the grain line. My pants have elastic in the waistband, even though they look like jeans. This is going to be the easiest type of pair of pants to make. I'm moving the waist seam out because the elastic makes the waist seam go in already a little bit. So you want to move it out just a bit so you have enough room for the elastic to pull things in. Here I'm pointing to the seam to show you that it's actually inside the fold. So I moved my out seam out away from where the pants pattern is to match where the seam is on the pants. It's on like that first stripe you can kind of see. Then I'm marking all the way down to the hem and the waistline, but you can see on this pair of pants you need extra to fold over so you can raise up that top area, and that will give you enough fabric to fold over and put elastic in the top. Next, I'm doing the crotch or rise seam. In pattern making and clothing, yeah, the word crotch is used like a lot. So it's just a technical term. You could also use like rise or saddle seam. Because this pants pattern has, or this pair of pants, the inseam also is underneath. I moved that seam out from where you can see it on the pants pattern, or the pants themselves, just like I did on the out seam. And I'm staying parallel to the edge of the pants so that I'm retaining the shape that is seen there. I'm marking where that fold line is on the top, and bada boom, I already have my back pants pattern. Now let's go ahead and do the front one. So because I did the left leg for the back, I'm going to do the left leg for the front. And I'm going to do pretty much the exact same thing. I'm going to mark my side seam, but on this one I need to mark underneath where it is already because that's where the seam is on this particular pair of pants. There's me. And same on the inseam. It's not exactly on the edge of where the pants lay on the paper, so you need to make sure to mark inside of that line. You can't really see, but I'm doing the same thing on the top that I did for the back top and marking where my center front seam is. I didn't fold this in half here because I can see it better when it's flat, the front piece. If your pair of pants is like a little less crazy than this pair, then feel free to fold them in half when you're doing the front. I'm drawing my saddle seam or my rise or crotch seam, and then I'm going to connect all my lines together. I can do this kind of by eye because I've been doing this for quite some time, pattern making, but if you need to use a ruler or anything, you could also fold the paper, and that would help make sure that the line is straight. My rise seam needs to go to the same exact place, so I leveled them out, and I'm drawing in a new seam in both the front and back just to make sure that everything's going to match up when I sew it. And I'm going to erase some of my other lines to make sure that everything's nice and clean. And now I have a good start to a pants pattern. It's okay if you need to do a lot of erasing and redoing, especially if this is like your first time pattern making. Now I'm labeling. That's really important if you're new to pattern making as well. I'm gonna label how many I need to cut out of the fabric. And then I decided here that I wanted to extend the outseam in the front on the front pair or the front pattern because it seemed a little bit narrow compared to the back. And I wanted kind of a wide leg pant. My next step is labeling all the other areas of the pattern so I don't get confused. I'm going to label the inseams and the outseams and finish out the hem. So I'm pretty tall. I end up letting this hem go down further by about 4 inches because the original pair of pants was way too short for me. So if you have any edits that you want to make to your pants pattern, now is a good time to do it. And now I'm labeling the inseams and the outseams because these are going to be the first thing I'm going to sew. Here's me marking the hem and deciding that I'm going to lengthen them by quite a bit for my tall, tall body. I'm like 5'10", and pants are always way too short for me. So if that's the case for you, making your own pants is a good way to make sure they're long enough. The next thing that I want to do is I decided, yep, to let out the inseam a little bit, just to make sure that the flare on the pants is how I wanted them. I wanted really long, wide leg pants. And now I have a good pants pattern. I'm going to label the outseams so I don't get confused. And then I will label the rise as well, just to make sure I understand what I'm doing. And that way, if you ever want to use this pants pattern again after you make it, you can know what you're working with. So I'm labeling also the waist, and then I had that top line as a fold line. So label where your fold line is on both the front and the back. At this point, my pencil's starting to need to be sharpened. Love a number 2 pencil, but need to keep a sharpener nearby. Last thing I do is label the front rise, and then I am going to add seam allowance all the way around, 1/2 inch all the way around, and I'm not going to show that because it takes a little bit of time. But the next thing I will do is cut my patterns out and cut my fabric out. So here's my fabric that I have. It's a one-directional fabric, so I have to make sure that I'm cutting everything the same way and that the print goes downward on the pair of pants and not upside down on either the front or back. I'm just making sure that the width of my fabric is good for my pants pattern. You kind of want to check beforehand to make sure everything's going to go well. And so I cut out along my seam allowance line. And now I'm going to cut my fabric. I don't use too many pins when I cut fabric, just kind of pin at the corners that could get shifted as I move around and I'm cutting. So like at the corner outseam hem, corner inseam hem, where the rise meets the inseam and at the waist is usually where I put pins. Here's me straightening out the fabric, making sure it's nice and flat. That's super important. And I wanted to be able to use that extra section that's by the fold line of the fabric. So I moved my pattern out towards the selvage edge of the fabric as far as possible. That gives me a lot of extra, like if I ever want to do another project, I have a bigger piece of fabric, a bigger piece of leftover fabric in the center. Hopefully that makes sense. So here I go to pin the fabric just in a few spots. If you do a lot of pins, you're gonna get more accurate cut probably if you haven't been pattern making or sewing for a long time. But if you have been pattern making and or sewing for a while, it's kind of easier to just do a few pins because then you don't have to take so many pins out once you're done cutting. So there's my piece all pinned up, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut it out. And I'm gonna do the same on the front, and I will just cut straight to when I have those cut out. All right, so here are my cutout pieces, front and back. I have 2 of each, and I made sure that I have a right leg and a left leg. So make sure that you don't like put both your fabrics face up if they have a print on one side and there's a front side and a back side, because you need a right leg and a left leg. So I'm going to take out the pins and show you exactly what I mean here. All right, let me take out all the pins, and yep, so now I have my front piece and my back piece, and I have right leg and left leg. So you can see when I pull that front piece off that there is a difference in, like, they're not both face up. I put the insides of the fabric together, or you could put the outsides of the fabric, like the face of the fabric together. But you need to be sure that you have the proper cut pieces for a right leg and a left leg. And so that's what this looks like. And now that I have my pieces all lined up, I can get ready to take them to the sewing machine and sew them up. My steps will be first to sew the inseam and the outseam on the right and left leg separately. And then I am going to put one inside the other and sew the rise seam all at once. Sounds complicated, but here we go. So first, yep, I'm going to sew the inseam of both pairs or both legs of the pair of pants. I mentioned in my last video about making a t-shirt that I have an industrial machine. It's a Juki DDL 8700, and because I sew a lot, this is like the best machine to have. I put it together myself. I bought it on Amazon. It was like the best purchase I ever made. If you're somebody who is like ready to take your sewing to the next level, definitely recommend getting an industrial machine. So I'm sewing my long seams on both pairs of pants separately. I don't really use pins on these long seams that I can just line up as I go. If you're using a home machine, it might be a little bit harder to do this without pins. The nice thing about having an industrial machine is it has a table, and so you can kind of adjust things as you're going. I like put it on my lap and line it up. As you can see, like with my right hand, I'm like guiding the fabric into the sewing machine to make sure that the edges of the seam allowance stay nice and together. I used half-inch seam allowance for this. If you're more comfortable with the bigger seam allowance, then you can totally do that. I also did not finish the inside of these pants with any sort of extra serging or seam finish because they're just for me. If you ever like go to the thrift store and you find home sewn goods, like sometimes they won't have seam allowances in them. So now I have sewn my inseam and my outseam on both legs of the pair of pants. I'm going to take one leg and put it inside the other. I'm going to make sure that the front and the back rise are lined up, and sew up the rise, and then that gets us one step closer to a pair of pants. So here's me putting one of the pant legs inside the other one, and I'm making sure that the face of the fabric is together. And then I'm lining up where the rise and the inseam meet on the pair of each pant leg, so that when I'm done, I have a pair of pants. I'm going to use a pin along the rise because it is a little bit hard to make sure that it stays together while you're sewing, and also that you don't sew something accidentally underneath it. So in these situations, I do use pins just because it's a little bit easier to handle what I'm doing. So I'm going up the rise. If they don't match for some reason, or they seem like they're not matching, you might have two of the same pant leg, like two right legs or something like that. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you. If it does, then you might need to recut one of your pant legs, unfortunately. All right, and so I'm almost done pinning that together. And next I'll put it under the machine and sew the rise, and then I'll be able to see that it'll look like a pair of pants when I'm done. I used 1/2 inch seam allowance on the rise, just like I did on the inseam and the outseam. So I'm going to go ahead and sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance there as well. This is just me showing you what it looks like to have this pinned together and what exactly you're going to be sewing, so that it's not any bit confusing, although it might still be. All right, so let's go ahead and sew it up. Take out the pins as I go. I'm not always the best about that. It's important to do that, otherwise your needle could break, and like, that's dangerous. It could go in your eye. So do take your pins out as you go. I mentioned in my last video that when you're sewing things for yourself, they don't have to necessarily be perfect. When you buy stuff at the store, like a pair of pants, or you buy a pair of pants anywhere, usually they're made somewhere where people are making clothes all day long, and they want to make sure that your clothes are going to stay intact. So they do seam finishes after they're done sewing the actual seam, so that the fabric doesn't unravel in the wash. But if you are making these for yourself and you have the capability to fix them if something like that happens, then you don't need to worry so much about that. All right, so I have my rise seam done. I'm going to turn my one pant leg back inside. Oh, I'm going to turn them all right side out, actually. And ta-da, it's a pair of pants. But we're not done yet. I still need to make sure that when I put them on me, they're going to stay. That's the seam I just sewed. So it looked like a U, and when you turn it inside or right side out, it fits along the like saddle of your body, or the crotch seam. That's why we call it that. So the next step is to sew the waistband. So I folded under just like a 1/2 inch, and then this is called a casing. It depends on the width of your elastic, or what, if you're doing a tie or something like that. You might have to add a buttonhole if that's the case. Elastic is the easiest thing to use. And if you have an old pair of sweatpants, you might be able to take elastic from that. Or sometimes at the thrift store, you can find elastic just in the craft section. So here I'm sewing just along the casing, just right at the edge. And I'm going to go all the way around. But I'm going to leave a little section open so that I can feed my elastic through the casing. Here I just keep sewing. Again, if you want to use pins to do this, you can, but I'm just kind of lining it up as I go, like I did with the inseam and the outseam. And now I'm coming to the point where I started, and I want to leave a good section open so that I can feed my elastic through and I don't have to kind of work too hard to get it through the hole. I leave about a good 3-4 inches open, and then we'll sew it down once we do the elastic. So here's my elastic. I'm going to just kind of measure it around my waist. I want to stretch it out a little bit so that when I pull on the pants, they stay up. And then I'm adding from that line a little bit out so that I have enough to overlap and sew the elastic together. Now I need a safety pin so that I can feed it through the casing. If you've ever like lost a string inside a hoodie, you know like kind of what this process is, only we get to do it from the beginning, and the safety pin will help make sure that I can, or you can pull it through really easily. It does take a little bit of like finesse. You have to kind of push the safety pin and scrunch the fabric. You can kind of see me doing that. The hardest parts are going to be where the seams are. So just give yourself time and patience if you don't get it the first time. Keep trying. Here I just am pulling it through all the way, and you want to make sure that that other side of the elastic is not being pulled through as well. So if you can maybe safety pin that piece of elastic to the pants, then you can make sure that it won't get lost inside there by the time you get the other end through. So I'm almost done pulling the elastic through. There's my safety pin. I took out the safety pin, and now I'm going to overlap my elastic by then I'm going to do an overlap of about 1.5 inches and sew the elastic together so that I have a nice elastic waistband. And make sure to sew this pretty well because you don't want the elastic to come undone, or this stitching to come undone once you have the casing sewn, because then you'll have to take the casing out and do it again. So do a lot of back stitching here. I sew it in a box, and then sometimes people sew an X through the box as well. That's all finished. I'm gonna clip my threads, and then I am going to kind of even it out along the waistline, and then I have that little opening that I need to sew back down. So I start where I left off and do a little back stitch and then just sew that down, and bada bing bada boom, I have a finished pair of pants. And I'll try them on again just to show you what they look like. You also can do the hem if you want to, but I didn't. I kind of just want the hem to be long. Here I am trying them on again. Super cute, super easy. Hopefully you guys found this educational, and now you can make your own pants whenever you want to because you have your own pattern. Let me know which kind of garment you want me to show you how to pattern and make next. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Mwah.